Welcome to Ask a Therapist, a show where qualified therapists stop by to answer all your questions. Welcome to another season of Ask a Therapist. Another season means another new therapist is going to be answering all your questions. Before I introduce you to the therapist, when it comes to your questions, if you check out the show notes, there is a link to our question form. You can drop your questions there using even a pseudonym and then stay listening for the therapist to answer them. It's as simple as that. Back to the season. So this particular therapist I follow on social media, and he does incredible videos just sharing knowledge on various issues you will encounter in your day-to-day and also on your healing journey. And there's 2 times that I knew we had to have him on our shows. One, he did a series talking about grief, and I felt those gems deep in my heart. Because, man, navigating grief can be something else. The second time is during the protests in Kenya this year. In case you're not from Kenya, we have been having non-stop protests from around June, just trying to agitate for change when it comes to governance and our very incompetent president. Around that time, he shared gems on how we can take care of our mental while agitating for change, or while being exposed to all of these news pieces that can be very heavy because it's a lot of doom and gloom and corruption. His name is Aldo, and in the show notes are his contacts in case while listening to him in this season and in this episode, you want to do one-on-one sessions with him. And now, let's get right into answering all your questions. Okay, so we have Aldo back for another episode of Ask a Therapist. And here's a question in this episode that was sent in. I had a very rocky childhood due to an abusive father who was constantly drunk. I have seriously struggled in relationships. I'm constantly finding myself in abusive relationships. A year ago, I got saved. And whilst I'm finding relief in church, I keep wondering if I should go to therapy. It makes so much sense in the African context. Unfortunately, the abusive drunk father is like a common thread in a lot of our homes. And then the finding relief in church.
Church can be extremely cathartic. There's the being a part of a group, the element of the higher power, the worship. And so there's nothing wrong with finding relief in it. But church is, if you have a support system, it'll be one part. And so you're looking at all the different parts that you need to stack up to be like, I want to be healthy and I want to deal with these things. So at church, they might not have the tools to be able to help you. And that's not a knock on church. It's for what it's for. The element of the therapy, as in the question, they keep finding themselves in abusive relationships. The thing about abuse or negative situations is, even as they are bad, they are familiar. So we get used to it. And so you find yourself in something like, why am I here? It's like, it's what you know. If that's the only map you have, that's where you're always going to go. But if you don't know that, then unwittingly, you're going to keep walking in that direction. So why therapy is beneficial is, now what attracted you to this person? Who do they remind you of? And then you start drawing those parallels, which you might have known subconsciously, but somebody drawing that line for you will be like, oh, so what I keep doing is looking for my father. As much as I told myself I hate this so much, there's that element of, yeah, but it's kind of all I know. And you might feel like it's what you deserve, but it doesn't have to be. And so why the therapeutic experience is so important is because of how individual it is. So you can have the church for, let's say, the larger one in terms of what you're trying to do with your life. You're in groups and you're, forging towards a common goal. But the therapy is for you specifically. And we're talking about how that relationship affected you and the wounds that you're carrying. So it's like, where are they? What are they? And then how can we deal with them? And so support systems can be, vast things, but it's not like there's room for one or the other. It's like, by all means, go to church and then also go for your personal therapy so that you're getting, let's say you're getting nourished in many different ways.
I really actually agree with that. And as someone who doesn't go to church, before I used to be very gung-ho about the Pan-African in me. It's just like, no, my people are being used and stuff. And when I sat back and became a bit more calmer, I was like, okay, but Adele, who are you to decide what someone gets from church. You know what I mean? And then I started unpacking that, and I was like, it really is community. If I look at like my grandma and her squad of girls, they all go to church together. Then they have lunches together. And then when there's a funeral, they're there for each other. And so I was like, oh my goodness, what she's getting here is community. It's not these Pan-African things I'm coming in to tell her. Like, that's neither here nor there. It's community. And that, I feel like that's something that is so important, regardless of what it looks like. It might look different for different people. And going through therapy, it helps to have a community that's cheering you on and like kind of motivating you. And I kind of have to say to this person, I'm just so proud that you have the consciousness to identify, one, that you're making a repeated decision, with your relationships, and two, that like, maybe I need something more. Most times we don't identify that.
True. And that's how we end up in the same patterns over and over again. It's so easy to do because, the pain is familiar. And so to the person, as you were saying, that element of pride for, you know what, that took something, because for the most part, people will talk about therapy with the stigma in that, but also the fear is, what if I unearth something which I've spent so much time trying to keep locked away? So I know there's pain there. It's in the corner, and I'm like, nah. Spend all my days avoiding it.
Yeah.
Hands over, it's still there. For the person to go and be like, this thing actually isn't going to disappear unless I face it. But then also saying, I'm not equipped to face it on my own, and so I need some help.
What's the correlation between your relationship with your parents and the type of partners that you seek?
Parents, as I've seen with clients, I've seen with myself, it's a lot. There's things which you might think, I'm like this because of me, and you grow up and you get to know them more, and you're like, it's because of my folks. And that's for the good, and that's for the bad as well. And so I think a beautiful thing about growing up is being able to go from, you're always going to be their child.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky enough to still have them, it's that element of you begin to understand them as just as people. Literally, they brought you into the world, so the relationship is always lopsided. Like, you can't really pay that back. If it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be here. Type deal. But when you look at those traits, or even like the relationship they have, and you have to ask yourself, what am I doing? And is it good? Is it bad? And am I just perpetuating the cycle? Because maybe they got that from their parents. And then they'll kind of be like, yeah, but see, that's how I was raised, so it's fine. And I'm like, if everybody was like that, then bad things would, and I guess there's a lot of bad stuff in the world still, but there would be no cycle breaking. It's like, oh, this is where I was at, thus this is what I have. I don't think it's like that. But I think there are huge, huge, huge effects of the kind of people they are and the kind of relationship you have with them, and also what you seek in your relationships and your partners. And you can also bring the trauma with you. So now you're intimate with somebody and you're doing things that maybe you wish you could tell them, but you can't because you don't have that kind of relationship, or maybe they passed away.
Yeah.
So you think there's nothing I can do about this. But in actuality, it's just, I guess, beginning to dig, and I guess being willing to see how much they affected you. Because if they did raise you, think about all the time you spent together when you were so young, all the stuff that you unwittingly absorbed. It's a lot. But just because that's the case, it doesn't mean that you don't have the opportunity to also define who you are as an individual.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think on the podcast, I've been talking about now grieving my dad. He was very abusive, definitely had an alcohol issue. My mom and him divorced when I was like in class 5, 6. And so since he wasn't in my life, I never used to join those conversations for father wounds, daddy issues. I was like, no, mine wasn't there, so I'm good. Like, I have nothing to sort out there. And then going to therapy and being like, oh my God, even his absence is something that is like directly impacting me. Oh my goodness. So now is when I'm like, oh guys, oh damn.
I was mistaken before. But it's cool though, because I believe in second chances.
And so it's like, I think for me, I'm also in that space where I'm just like, oh my goodness, like your parents, you can draw parallels and you can find, it's not comfort in chaos, or like it's familiarity, like you said. It's uncomfortable, but it's familiar. So I must stay here, you know what I mean? Until you say, this is not how I should live. Like, I want to break this, you know? And so I truly agree with you on that point. And also the point of like seeing your parents as humans. Because then in doing that, I started being like, okay, this guy was like firstborn African son, paying fees for God knows how many other siblings coming after him. Yes, obviously he had an alcohol problem, but everybody around him was probably drinking as much. So like, how does he figure out like mine is an issue, you know? And so I just started being like, oh, I'm not excusing all the stuff you did, but I can understand it.
That's really important. It doesn't have to make it okay, but understanding is better. Because without it, we demonize people a lot. And there's some people who, I don't want to say like bad people, but the decisions they make and the fallout from those decisions can say, you know what, I can't walk that back. But you can still understand, especially when it comes to, as you were saying, the father wounds or the way that you relate to his presence or indeed absence.
Yeah.
Absence can be loud and it can be very present. And they have like this things that I really block out, but it's like the stuff there that's worthy of interaction. Yeah, and it takes a lot to go there. So in understanding them as people, and when the conversation shifts, then I guess even you look at ages, like how old were they? What were they doing? What were they attempting to do? And did it work? And not everything did. And the thing about it is the responsibility now shifts. So when we become adults, and I say this to people in sessions sometimes, it's like now there comes a point when the responsibility to get better is yours.
Yeah.
Not your parents. It's not fair. And I'm like, I never said that this was going to be fair. I said that this process is going to be good for you. But the difficulty is getting over the part of you that's justifiably angry. Like, I didn't ask for them to do this to me. And I'm like, no, you didn't. But if you don't do this work, then you're going to be that person in somebody else's story. Because they weren't there when you were growing up. All they know you is as, this is the person who provides for me. So they didn't see that bit. So you can't expect them to understand what they didn't see or experience. And so imagine you're the inception point for somebody's story and you're doing all these things. That's how they know you. Your parents might have done that, your grandparents and aunties, uncles, all this different stuff. But the responsibility becomes yours. And once you accept that, what is often a bitter pill to swallow, all the healing is on the other side of that realization.
I hope this episode gave you insights that can help you on your healing journey. Remember to send in your questions via our question form. There's a link to it in the show notes. And if you want to book a one-on-one therapy session with Aldo, we've put his contacts in the show notes as well as his social media platforms, because he shares a lot of gems when it comes to giving you knowledge that can help you on your healing journey. That's all for this episode. If you have a question to ask a therapist, please drop it in our question form. A link to it is in the show notes. Catch you next week for the next episode of Ask a Therapist.